The following reconstruction is based on fragments recovered from three intelligence services: British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and the Iberian section of the Special Operations Executive. The files were incomplete when discovered in 1974, having been subjected to routine destruction protocols in 1946. What remains suggests an operation that may never have occurred, concerning an object that may never have existed, pursued by agencies that could not agree on basic facts. The investigation was opened on November 12, 1943, and officially closed on March 3, 1944. No formal conclusion was reached. No debriefing documents survive. The case was simply abandoned, filed under miscellaneous intelligence matters, and forgotten until a junior archivist noted the peculiar absence of resolution in a file marked with the highest security classification. This narrative attempts to impose order on chaos, to construct linear time from circular bureaucracy, to find truth in a hall of mirrors where every reflection showed something different. It begins with a telegram. First report, November 1943. The telegram arrived at Broadway Buildings, London, on November 12, 1943, at 14:37 hours. It had been sent from the British Embassy in Madrid via secure diplomatic pouch, then encoded and transmitted through standard cipher channels. The sender was identified as Cobweb, a station designation for MI6 senior officer in the Spanish capital. The message was brief. Item of interest: stop red leather briefcase. Stop marked with crown insignia. Stop allegedly contains overlord materials. Stop courier identified as major. Or stop last seen Madrid Railway. Terminus. Stop destination unknown. Stop request instruction. Stop. The duty officer who received the message was Captain Jeffrey Alderton, a veteran of Section 5 counterintelligence operations. He read it 3 times before placing a red flag on the file and sending it upstairs. Within an hour, it had reached the desk of Commander Reginald Fletcher, head of the Iberian desk. Within 2 hours, it had been cross-referenced against every active operation involving Spain, Portugal, and Gibraltar. Within 4 hours, it had become a problem. The problem was simple. No such briefcase was supposed to exist. Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of Western Europe, was the most closely guarded secret in the Allied war effort. Its planning documents were restricted to a handful of individuals with bigot clearance, a security designation so exclusive that even most generals did not possess it. The plans existed in exactly 6 copies, each numbered, each accounted for daily, each stored in triple-lock safes under armed guard. The idea that a 7th copy might be traveling through neutral Spain in a red leather briefcase carried by an unknown courier was not merely alarming. It was impossible. Fletcher's first action was to verify the 6 copies. By 1900 hours that evening, all 6 had been accounted for, 3 in London, 2 in Washington, 1 with General Eisenhower in North Africa. None were missing. None had been copied. The paper stock itself was specially watermarked and inventoried. Every sheet was present, which meant either Cobweb's intelligence was false or someone had created a 7th copy through means unknown. Fletcher sent a return telegram. Confirm source, stop, verify, item, stop, assess reliability, stop, do not engage, stop. The response arrived 12 hours later. Cobweb reported that the source was a Spanish railway porter at Estación del Norte who doubled as a paid informant for British intelligence. The porter, codenamed Sparrow, had seen the briefcase being loaded into a first-class compartment by a man in a British Army officer's uniform. The briefcase was distinctive, red Moroccan leather, expensive, with a small crown embossed in gold on the latch. The officer had tipped the porter generously in sterling, which was notable because most travelers in Spain used pesetas or escudos to avoid attention. Sparrow had remembered the interaction because the officer spoke Spanish with a perfect Castilian accent, unusual for a British military man. The officer had given his name as Major Rothwell and said he was traveling to Lisbon on diplomatic business. Fletcher ran the name through MI6 registry of serving officers. There were 3 Major Rothwells currently in service. One was in Burma, one was in Cairo, and one was dead, killed in North Africa 6 months earlier. None had authorization to travel to Spain. None had any connection to overlord planning. None existed in the right place at the right time. Major Rothwell, whoever he was either using a false identity or did not exist at all. The Shadow Network. Spain in 1943 was a nation caught between neutrality and complicity. Francisco Franco's regime maintained official non-belligerence while allowing German submarines to refuel in Spanish ports and permitting Nazi intelligence networks to operate openly in Madrid and Barcelona. Simultaneously, Spain accepted British and American bribes, allowed Allied agents to use its territory for transit, and turned a blind eye to escape lines moving downed airmen and escaped prisoners north across the Pyrenees. The result was a country honeycombed with spies, informants, double agents, and entrepreneurs who sold information to whoever paid best. Every hotel lobby was a dead drop. Every cafe was a meeting place. Every railway station was a marketplace where secrets changed hands along with currency and contraband. MI6 presence in Spain was managed through Section 5, the counterintelligence division headed by the formidable Colonel Felix Cowgill. Section 5 operated from the embassy in Madrid, the consulate in Barcelona, and a clandestine listening post in Gibraltar. Their mission was to monitor Axis intelligence operations, run agents, and prevent leaks of Allied secrets. They were very good at their work. They were also stretched thin, operating with limited personnel and competing against German intelligence services that had been embedded in Spain since before the war. When Fletcher sent cobweb orders to locate Major Rothwell and the Red Briefcase, he initiated a cascade of intelligence gathering that would eventually involve 43 separate agents, informants, and liaison officers across 3 countries. The operation was given the cryptonym Red Brief and classified at the highest level. Only 12 people in London knew it existed. Within 48 hours, the first reports began arriving. They did not clarify the situation. They made it worse. Contradictions. Agent Nightjar, operating out of Barcelona, reported contact with a British officer matching the description of Major Rothwell. Nightjar had encountered him in a cafe near the port on November 10th, 2 days before Sparrow's sighting in Madrid. The officer was traveling with a red briefcase and had inquired about passage to Tangier. He spoke Spanish fluently, but with a slight Argentine accent, not Castilian. Nightjar described him as tall, approximately 6 feet, with dark hair graying at the temples, a thin mustache, and a scar on his left cheek. Agent Falcon, based in Seville, reported a different sighting. On November 14th, a British officer calling himself Major Richmond had checked into the Hotel Alfonso XIII, carrying a distinctive red leather briefcase. He had dined alone, paid in gold sovereigns, and departed the next morning on a train bound for the Portuguese border. Falcon described him as of medium height, perhaps 5'9", clean-shaven, with sandy blonde hair and no visible scars. Agent Kestrel in Lisbon reported that a Major Radcliffe had arrived at the embassy on November 16th requesting assistance with travel documents. He carried a red briefcase that he refused to let out of his sight. When questioned about his authorization for being in Portugal, he became evasive and left the embassy abruptly. Kestrel described him as short and stocky with a Welsh accent. 3 different descriptions, 3 different names, all beginning with R, 3 different locations. And yet each agent was certain they had encountered the same man because of the briefcase. The red leather briefcase with the crown insignia. Fletcher ordered a full registry check on all 3 names: Rothwell, Richmond, Radcliffe. The results were maddening. There were serving officers with each surname, but none matched the descriptions. None had authorization to be in Iberia, and none had any connection to each other or to overlord planning. It was as if someone had opened the army list, selected common surnames at random, and fabricated identities from thin air. The American OSS became involved on November 18th when their station chief in Madrid, a man known only as Carpenter in the files, reported that his own network had picked up rumors of a British intelligence disaster, something about compromised invasion plans. Carpenter wanted clarification. Fletcher, operating under strict need-to-know protocols, provided minimal information but requested that OSS assets assist in locating the briefcase and its courier. The Americans threw their considerable resources into the search. Within days, they had generated their own sightings, their own descriptions, their own contradictions. An OSS informant in Gibraltar reported a major Russell. Another in Malaga reported a major Randolph. Each sighting was plausible. Each was impossible to verify. Each made the picture less clear rather than more. By the end of November, intelligence files contained references to 8 different men, all carrying red briefcases, all using names beginning with R, all claiming to be British military officers, all traveling through neutral territory on vague diplomatic business. None could be definitively confirmed. None could be definitively dismissed. Commander Fletcher began to suspect they were not hunting one man. They were hunting a phantom, the forgers. On December 3rd, 1943, a break appeared to materialize. Spanish police in San Sebastián arrested a man attempting to cross into France with false papers. During the search of his possessions, they discovered a red leather briefcase. The Spanish authorities, maintaining their delicate balance between Axis and Allies, notified both German and British intelligence of the arrest. MI6 moved faster. An officer from Gibraltar arrived in San Sebastián within 12 hours and arranged for the prisoner's transfer to British custody through diplomatic channels, essentially a bribe substantial enough to overcome Spanish bureaucratic resistance. The prisoner was transported to Gibraltar and held in a secure facility for interrogation. His name, according to his papers, was Albert Crane. He was 47 years old, a resident of London, and worked as a commercial traveler in textiles. Under initial questioning, he maintained this identity and claimed the briefcase was simply a sample case for his business. He had no explanation for why he was attempting to enter occupied France or why his papers were forged. The interrogation was conducted by Major Thomas Sinclair, a specialist in counterintelligence with a reputation for extracting truth from liars. Sinclair's report, filed on December 6th, painted a very different picture. Crane was not a textile salesman. He was a professional forger who had worked for various intelligence services throughout the war, British, American, German, and even Soviet on one occasion. His specialty was documents, passports, travel permits, identity cards, military orders. He was apolitical, motivated entirely by money, and very good at his work. He had created papers for escape lines, for agents going into occupied territory, for refugees fleeing persecution. He operated in the gray zones where law and morality dissolved into necessity. Under pressure, Crane admitted that he had been hired to create a specific set of documents related to a red briefcase. The client had been a man who identified himself only as Major R. The Major had provided Crane with genuine British military stationery, accurate unit designations, and precise formatting instructions. Crane's task was to produce a complete set of travel orders and authorization letters for a courier mission to Lisbon. The documents were to be backdated and signed with authentic-looking signatures. Crane had completed the work in late October. He had been paid £200 sterling, a fortune for a single job. The Major had taken the documents and disappeared. Crane never saw him again. When Sinclair showed Crane photographs of serving British officers named Rothwell, Richmond, or Radcliffe, Crane identified none of them. When asked to describe Major R, Crane provided a description that matched none of the previous sightings. Elderly, perhaps 60, with white hair and glasses, speaking English with an accent Crane could not place. The briefcase confiscated in San Sebastián was examined by technical specialists. It was indeed red Moroccan leather with a crown insignia on the latch. Inside were business documents related to textile imports, all forged, all created by Crane as part of his cover identity for crossing into France. There were no invasion plans. There was nothing relating to Overlord. The briefcase was a prop, authentically crafted but containing nothing of value. Crane insisted he knew nothing about invasion plans. He had been hired to forge travel documents and had done so. Everything else, the rumors, the sightings, the briefcase, was beyond his knowledge. Either he was telling the truth, or he was a better actor than interrogator. Sinclair's assessment was blunt. Crane was a forger for hire, not an enemy agent. He had likely been used by Major R without understanding the larger operation. But the existence of Major R himself remained unconfirmed. Crane's description matched no one. The money could not be traced. The stationery could have come from anywhere, stolen, purchased on the black market, or provided by someone with access to genuine materials. The trail, which had briefly seemed to warm, went cold again. The documents. While Crane was being interrogated in Gibraltar, a separate line of investigation opened in London. Commander Fletcher had ordered a comprehensive review of all document security protocols related to Overlord. If someone had created a 7th copy of the invasion plans, there would be traces, missing paper stock, unauthorized access to typing pools, gaps in the custody chain. The review was conducted by a humorless civil servant from the Cabinet Office named Arthur Pemberton. Pemberton approached the task with the thoroughness of a medieval monk cataloging scripture. He inventoried every sheet of paper, every carbon copy, every typing ribbon used in the creation of Overlord documents. He interviewed secretaries, clerks, couriers, and guards. He examined lock logs and visitor registers. He spent 6 weeks reconstructing the life cycle of every piece of paper that had touched the planning process. His report, delivered in mid-January 1944, was both reassuring and disturbing. Reassuring, no materials were missing. No unauthorized copies had been made. The security protocols were sound. If someone possessed actual Overlord plans, they had not obtained them through documentary theft or copying. Disturbing, Pemberton had discovered something else. In late September 1943, a request had been made through proper channels for sample documentation related to large-scale amphibious operations. The request came from the War Office's Training Division, which was developing instructional materials for junior officers. The request was approved, and a set of notional plans, fictional invasion plans based on realistic strategic principles, had been created as teaching aids. These notional plans were detailed enough to be plausible, generic enough to be unclassifiable, and carefully designed to contain no actual Overlord information. They outlined a hypothetical invasion of the French coast using imaginary unit designations and fabricated logistics. They looked real. They felt real. But they were fiction, created specifically for training purposes. Pemberton's investigation revealed that 30 copies of these notional plans had been printed. 29 were accounted for, distributed to various training establishments and staff colleges. 1 copy was missing. It had been signed out in October by Major E. Russell for use in a training exercise at an establishment in Hampshire. The establishment existed. The exercise did not. Major E. Russell existed in the registry, but had been on sick leave in Scotland during October and had never requested the documents. Someone using Russell's name and authorization had taken possession of a set of fake invasion plans that looked real enough to fool anyone who did not know the difference. Fletcher read Pemberton's report 3 times. Then he walked to the window of his office and stood there for 20 minutes, smoking cigarettes and watching rain fall on the Thames. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, though what the picture showed remained unclear. The theory. On January 22, 1944, Commander Fletcher convened a meeting in a secure conference room at Broadway Buildings. Present were representatives from MI6, OSS, SOE, and military intelligence. The room was windowless, lit by weak bulbs that cast shadows across faces already drawn from months of war and insufficient sleep. Cigarette smoke hung in layers like fog. Fletcher laid out his theory. Major did not exist. He was a construct, an identity created from fragments of real people and fictional details. The name changed depending on who was asking: Rothwell, Richmond, Radcliffe, Russell, but the initial remained constant. The descriptions varied because different witnesses saw different men, possibly several individuals working in coordination, possibly the same person using theatrical disguises, possibly no one at all, and the reports were themselves fabrications. The Red Briefcase was real. Multiple witnesses had described it consistently. The leather, the crown insignia, the distinctive color. These details appeared in reports from agents who had no contact with each other, suggesting the briefcase itself was a physical object that had moved through Spain and Portugal in the hands of one or more couriers. The contents of the briefcase were likely the notional invasion plans, the training documents that looked real but contained no actual overlord intelligence. Someone had obtained these documents, placed them in a distinctive briefcase, and ensured that briefcase was seen by multiple intelligence networks across Iberia. The purpose was unclear. 3 possibilities existed. First, this was a German intelligence operation designed to distract and confuse Allied counterintelligence. By creating the illusion of compromised invasion plans, the Germans could trigger security reviews, shift resources toward damage control, and potentially identify Allied agents through their responses to the crisis. It was psychological warfare, using the appearance of a leak to create panic without needing an actual leak. Second, this was an Allied deception operation, possibly related to broader efforts to mislead the Germans about invasion, timing, and location. The briefcase and its courier were deliberate plants, designed to be noticed by German intelligence, who would then waste resources investigating fake plans while the real invasion was prepared elsewhere. It would explain why the documents were notional rather than real. The operation required plausibility, not authenticity. Third, this was neither enemy action nor Allied deception, but something stranger, a private operation conducted by an individual or small group for purposes unknown. Perhaps blackmail, perhaps profiteering, perhaps the work of someone who wanted to test security protocols or prove a point about intelligence vulnerabilities. This option was the most troubling because it suggested gaps in security that neither Allies nor Axis had exploited, but that could be exploited by opportunists. The meeting lasted 4 hours. No consensus was reached. The OSS representative argued strongly for the first theory, seeing German fingerprints in the operational complexity. The SOE representative favored the second theory, noting that deception operations often required such Byzantine construction. Fletcher himself leaned toward the third theory, but could not articulate why beyond intuition. A decision was made to continue surveillance, but scale back active pursuit. Too much attention might reveal Allied concern and suggest the documents were real rather than notional. Better to monitor the situation, track any further sightings, and prepare responses to German actions if the enemy had indeed acquired what they believed were genuine invasion plans. The meeting adjourned. The attendees filed out, returning to their separate wars. The file on Red Brief was marked ongoing surveillance and transferred to a lower priority desk. And then, unexpectedly, the situation resolved itself. The Intercept, on February 14th, 1944, Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park decrypted a German Abwehr transmission sent from Madrid to Berlin. The decrypt was routine priority, part of the steady stream of German intelligence traffic that British codebreakers processed daily. It was flagged for special attention only because it mentioned British invasion planning. The transmission reported that Abwehr assets in Spain had obtained what appeared to be Allied invasion documents through a complex acquisition involving multiple cutouts and substantial payment. The documents outlined an amphibious assault on the French coast, tentatively scheduled for late spring or early summer 1944. The acquisition was considered a significant intelligence success. However, the transmission continued. Subsequent analysis by Abwehr specialists in Berlin had revealed inconsistencies. Unit designations did not match known Allied order of battle. Logistics figures seemed implausible. Geographical details were accurate, but operational details were suspiciously generic. The documents were assessed as probable training materials or deliberate deception, not authentic invasion plans. The Abwehr recommended treating the documents as potentially misleading and not incorporating them into German defensive planning. The source who provided the documents, identified only as a British officer traveling through neutral territory, was suspected of being either a double agent or an unwitting courier for a deception operation. The transmission ended with a note that further investigation had been suspended as resources were needed for higher priority operations. When this decrypt reached Fletcher's desk on February 16th, he sat back in his chair and allowed himself a rare smile. The Germans had taken the bait, analyzed it, and correctly identified it as worthless. But in doing so, they had revealed that they possessed the notional plans, which meant the Red Briefcase had reached its intended destination, German intelligence. Whether Major was working for the Germans, working for British deception, or working for himself hardly mattered. The operation, whatever it was, had concluded with the Germans acquiring documents they correctly assessed as fake. From an intelligence perspective, this was ideal. The Germans had wasted time and money on a wild goose chase. They had learned nothing. And most importantly, they now suspected that any intelligence coming out of Iberia might be part of an Allied deception effort, which would make them more cautious and skeptical of genuine leaks in the future. Fletcher drafted a final report on Red Brief. The operation was classified as likely deception operation, favorable outcome. The Red Briefcase and Major were assessed as probable elements of an uncoordinated deception effort, possibly conducted by freelance operators or low-level Allied intelligence personnel operating outside normal channels. No security breach had occurred. No actual overlord intelligence had been compromised. The case could be closed. The report was filed, stamped, and consigned to the archives, except for one detail that Fletcher noted in a handwritten addendum but never pursued. The German transmission mentioned payment for the documents. The amount was not specified, but the phrase used suggested substantial funds had changed hands. Someone had been paid for delivering the notional plans to German intelligence. Someone had made a profit from this entire affair. Major R, whoever he was, had successfully sold fake invasion plans to the Germans, triggered a minor panic in Allied intelligence, and disappeared with payment from both sides. The forger Crane had been paid £200 for documents, suggesting Major R had received considerably more from his ultimate clients. It was, Fletcher noted with grudging admiration, a perfect con, invisible to both sides, profitable for the perpetrator, harmless to Allied security, and utterly untraceable. The addendum was filed with the report. Fletcher never mentioned it to his superiors. Some operations were better left as mysteries. Post-war analysis. When the Red Brief file was reviewed by historians in the 1970s, several details emerged that had been missed during the original investigation. Albert Crane, the forger interrogated in Gibraltar, was released in March 1944 and returned to Britain. He was arrested again in 1947 for passport fraud and sentenced to 3 years in prison. During that trial, his defense attorney mentioned in passing that Crane had once done a job for British intelligence involving invasion planning documents, a claim that was not pursued because Crane refused to elaborate and the judge ruled it irrelevant to the charges. The notional invasion plans created by the War Office Training Division were destroyed in 1945 as part of routine document disposal. The missing copy, the one signed out by the non-existent Major Russell, was never recovered. Its ultimate fate remains unknown. In 1952, a red leather briefcase with a crown insignia was donated to the Imperial War Museum by an anonymous benefactor. The museum catalog lists it as leather attaché case, circa 1940s, possible military provenance. It has been on display intermittently in exhibitions about wartime espionage. The museum has no information about its history beyond the donation. Several former intelligence officers published memoirs in the 1960s and 70s. None mention Red Brief or Major R. However, one memoir by an unnamed MI6 officer contains a cryptic reference to the Ghost Courier of Madrid and notes that some of the best intelligence operations were those that never officially occurred. The American OSS files on Red Brief, if they existed, were not transferred to the CIA when that agency was formed in 1947. They may have been destroyed or may remain classified under different designations. The true identity of Major R was never established. Various theories have been proposed by intelligence historians. He was a German agent running a complex operation to test Allied security responses. He was a British deception specialist operating under deep cover without official sanction. He was a Soviet intelligence officer testing infiltration capabilities in neutral territory. He was a con artist exploiting the chaos of wartime intelligence for personal profit. He was a composite, several different people whose activities were conflated by confused reports and bureaucratic errors into a single non-existent individual. Or, as one retired MI6 officer suggested in an interview conducted shortly before his death in 1983, Major R was exactly what the intelligence reports indicated: a phantom, a construct, a fiction that became real because enough people believed in him. In the world of intelligence, perception and reality were often indistinguishable. A spy who never existed could be more effective than one who did, because he could never be caught, never be turned, never be compromised. He existed in reports and rumors, in sightings and shadows, in the spaces between what was known and what was believed. The officer, who refused to be identified even posthumously, concluded with an observation: the best secrets are the ones nobody knows are secrets, and the best operations are the ones that nobody knows were operations. Major R, whoever or whatever he was, achieved both. That makes him either the worst intelligence officer in history or the best. I've spent 40 years trying to decide which. Final assessment. The Red Brief operation, if it can be called an operation, remains one of the peculiar footnotes of World War II intelligence history. It consumed thousands of man-hours, generated hundreds of pages of reports, involved agents across 3 countries, and achieved nothing measurable. Or achieved everything intended, depending on interpretation. The Red Briefcase existed. The documents existed. The sightings existed. But Major R himself, the courier, the spy, the ghost at the center of it all, remains absent from every definitive record. He appears only in the negative space, in what is missing rather than what is present. This may be the point. Intelligence work during World War II was characterized by elaborate deceptions, multiple layers of misdirection, and operations designed to confuse as much as inform. The boundary between real and fake, between genuine intelligence and planted misinformation, became so blurred that even the operatives themselves sometimes lost track of what they believed. Major R and his Crimson Briefcase may have been an extreme example of this phenomenon, an operation so layered with deception that it deceived everyone, including possibly its own creators. Or he may have been an illusion, a collective hallucination born from the paranoia of wartime intelligence services seeing patterns in random noise. The historical record cannot definitively prove he existed. It cannot definitively prove he did not exist. This ambiguity may be the most successful aspect of the entire affair. Intelligence agencies, by their nature, traffic in uncertainty. They operate in gray zones where facts are scarce and interpretation is everything. They create illusions, manufacture identities, and construct narratives from fragments of truth. Sometimes these constructions become so elaborate that they take on lives of their own, independent of their creator's intentions. Perhaps Major R was one such construction, born from paperwork errors, witness confusion, and bureaucratic miscommunication, but becoming real through the collective belief of intelligence services on both sides of the war. He was given names, descriptions, motivations, and agency not because he possessed these things, but because the intelligence machinery needed him to possess them to make sense of contradictory information. In this interpretation, Major R was not a person. He was a symptom, a manifestation of the confusion and chaos that characterized intelligence work during World War II, when everyone was lying to everyone else and the truth had become a casualty more certain than those counted on any battlefield. Or perhaps, in the end, he was simply a clever man with a red briefcase who saw an opportunity and took it, who played the great powers against each other, who sold worthless documents for considerable profit, and who walked away from history without leaving his real name in any file. The archives offer no conclusion. The files contain only questions. And Major R, if he existed, took his answers to a grave that no one can find because no one knows who to look for. The Crimson Briefcase sits in a museum display case, behind glass, labeled but unexplained. Visitors walk past it without a second glance. It is, after all, just an old briefcase. Red leather, crown insignia, nothing special, unless you know the story, unless you've read the files, unless you've spent hours in archives trying to trace a ghost through the paperwork of history. Then it becomes something else entirely. It becomes proof that sometimes the most effective intelligence operations are the ones that leave no trace except questions. That sometimes the best spies are the ones who never existed at all. And that sometimes, in the labyrinth of wartime espionage, the only truth is that there is no truth, only versions, interpretations, and the eternal uncertainty of shadows cast by lights that may never have been lit.